May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his, and anything else that comes to mind. Oh, I should say, doing our bit to preserve the legacy. I said preserving the legacy for a long time, but then I thought, well, a lot of people are doing that, and it might sound sort of arrogant. So please retroactively apply doing our bit to preserve the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his. And notice I say cross his, not crossed. At first I said crossed because, I was really focusing on people who had studied with him. But our paths cross his now. And you don't have to have met him for your paths cross his. Anyway, to continue the introduction, I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we have a guest, Laura Burges. Now, we did a podcast with her a while back. She had 2 books come out earlier this year, Buddhist Stories for Kids and Zen Buddhist Stories for Kids. I don't know those names, and it might not be quite right. But the name that I am going to get right is the book of hers that is coming out on July 18th, The Zen Way of Recovery, An Illuminated Path Out of the Darkness of Addiction. She has a lot to say about that, and it's interesting. I mean, she talks about her path and her Buddhist path, her Zen path, and her alcohol path, and her teaching path, and where they've led her. And it's pretty inspiring. So, let's just have our pause to meditate and then give Laura a call. So when you hear the bell, if you have such a mind, hit pause and meditate or whatever for as long as you wish. And when you're ready to come back, hit unpause. And we'll be here to hit the bell to end the meditation or whatever and give Laura Burges a call.
Hello.
Hi, Laura. How you doing?
Hi, David. Good to hear your voice. I'm doing well. How about you?
Okay. Yeah. I called you a couple of minutes early.
Well, I'm ready for you.
Yeah. The reason I did it.
I was getting psyched up for our conversation.
Oh, yeah. Good. Good. The reason I did it is I've been getting a sort of, I don't know what you call it, a spam call.
Oh.
On Skype. From Pretty. It said Skype video. So I just let it ring out and then I blocked it. But it came back. I blocked it and reported it. It came back, so I figured they used another number. So what's happening?
What's happening? Well, I'm enjoying retirement, except now I'm writing, So
yeah.
Right now I'm working on my 5th book, which is a book of Indian wisdom stories, and for older children. And but this book The Zen Way of Recovery is coming out July 18th. So that's exciting, and I'm really happy to talk with you about this one.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I thought you could do, not right now, talk about it, well, is read the piece you sent me.
I'd like to read you a different piece, actually.
Oh, yeah, okay.
If I could. Because,
yeah, your choice.
Yeah, I think this one is a good example of kind of blending some of the Zen teachings with my recovery work. So I think I sent you the piece that appeared in Buddha Dharma, or maybe the one from Tricycle. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I'd like to read you something else.
All right. So now, remind me how this book came about.
Well, where to begin? I grew up, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life, David. I grew up in the East Bay, and my first real relationship in high school was with someone who liked to drink a lot, and we drank a lot together. And we traveled for about a year together from Europe to India, overland, and had a lot of adventures with alcohol and various substances, and but of course, more importantly, the wonderful cultures that we encountered. We especially loved Afghanistan, and we spent about a month in Afghanistan on our way to India. And at that point, Afghanistan was like a 12th century culture with horse-drawn carriages and lanterns swinging in the wind, and camel trains coming through at night with their bells jingling. Now, as a Western woman in that culture, it was quite dicey for me, but I always wore a head covering, and the people understood we were from another culture, so they were very gracious towards us. Then we went on to India and lived in northern India for a month, and then came back to Afghanistan for another month. So, I really was struck by what it felt like to live in a country that's permeated with religion, both in Afghanistan and then India. But the shadow of substance abuse kind of hung over that relationship. And when we came back to the United States, we both had culture shock from poverty and some dangerous experiences we'd had when we were traveling. So we decided to live in Pacific Grove and go to Monterey Peninsula College. And
what year was that?
That was in 1972.
And when did you leave for India?
We left in the fall of 70, and then came back in late 71, and then moved to Pacific Grove. And while I'm calling this fellow that I was with Sam in my book, and I'm calling his brother Chris. And Chris was drunk driving in the Los Padres wilderness one day, and he kept thinking he was going to come to a gas station at some point. And he ended up at the gates of this monastery called Tassajara Zen Mountain Center. And he was siphoning gas out of a car when this monk appeared. I like to think it might have been Isan, and asked him, "Would you like to buy some gas?" And so Chris, was embarrassed to be caught doing something wrong. And but he was invited into Tassajara. It was practice period. He was given some time in the baths and a loaf of bread, and he paid for the gas he'd taken and went on his way. And this made a really deep impression on him, to be treated well when he was stealing gas. And so when summer came around, Chris and Sam and I all went into Tassajara. And the funny thing, David, is even though, a couple years later I would be living there as a student, I don't remember being particularly curious about what was going on there. We had a big gallon of wine, and we went down to this narrows and went skinny dipping, and
Uh-huh.
and here were these monks wandering around, but I'm surprised I wasn't more curious about that.
Uh-huh.
So then we went back to PG, Pacific Grove, and, we had met all these kids there from Juneau, Alaska. And I felt like I needed to break up with Sam because, I felt he was a very bad influence on me.
Why had you met a bunch of kids from Juneau, Alaska?
Well, they would come down to study. I don't know why they went to MPC, Monterey Peninsula College, but a number of them were studying at the Russian at the Language Institute there.
Uh-huh.
So it's funny.
Now there's two language schools. There's the
Yeah.
Defense Language Institute, which is part of U.S. government, and then there's back then it was called the Monterey Institute of Foreign Studies.
Maybe it was. I'm not sure which one they went to, but you'd probably have to be in the service to go to the government one, right?
Well, you'd have to be with the government.
Yeah. But you know what? These were really wonderful kids. We're all in our 20s and early 20s, and when Sybil, one of them, invited me to come on up to Juneau, I think she was kind of surprised when I showed up. I got a ride up the coast of Washington, and I took a ferry up to Juneau, and I was up there for about a year. And, I had a wonderful time. I cleaned houses for a living, and then I got a job working in the Alaska State Legislature. I was assistant to the Senate Majority Leader, Yalmar Kurtula. I love that name, typing for him. But, what happened to me with alcohol in Juneau was I found out, I could drink an awful lot on my own without the influence of Sam. And I really went to a very, very dark place with alcohol. My drinking became unpredictable. I could drink people under the table. And what really got my attention was one night I came to out of a blackout crawling through the snow. And, I knew that people died that way in Alaska. So that was, what I later learned is called pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization. And I decided, I had this little thought. I was kind of sitting in this cabin in the wintertime thinking, there's something terribly wrong with my life, but maybe there's another way to live that I need to discover. So I decided Juneau was my problem, and I came back to San Francisco. And I got really drunk one night and smoked a lot of cigarettes, and I was so sick the next day that I couldn't even think of picking up a drink. And I started this kind of spiritual search. I went to the yogis. I went to the I went to all these different churches and kind of looking for a spiritual solution, and I ended up at Zen Center. And I just stopped drinking, and I plunged into practice. I was a guest student at Tassajara. This was a couple of years after I'd been there with my friends, and
so it was like 74.
This was 75 when I went as a guest student.
Yeah, I was director then.
Yeah, you were there.
Yeah.
And I think you were living in, where were you living? Maybe in the garden cabin or something?
Right. But with Diane back then and baby Kelly.
That's right. Yeah. Well, all paths. I met some very significant people in my life at Tassajara. Anyway, I came back to the city, and I had to live in the building for a while, and then I went back for practice period in 76, and I met Nova's dad, Michael, down there, and we ended up getting married at Tassajara and came back to the city with Nova, and so I hadn't had a drink in 5 years, and I started thinking, what? I've been practicing Buddhism. I'm married now. I've got a little girl. I think I can probably drink again, This is the way people think who or in the thrall of alcoholism. I just thought I'd be okay. And so alcohol started creeping back in my life, not with the careless abandon of my youth, but, I would try not to drink, and then I would, and I was trying to protect my daughter from that. So I get a babysitter. I didn't want her to see that. And I would stop for periods of time. But, after 5 years of that, I just thought I really need help. And what happened, David, was I'd gone back to San Francisco State to get a teaching credential. And I was sitting in a classroom at State, just shaking and sick from the night before.
Mm.
And I had this moment of clarity. I thought, because I had gone to San Francisco State when I was in college, when I was 18, and I thought, I have traveled the world. I've had the benefit of wonderful Buddhist teachers and teachings. I have a beautiful daughter. My marriage was over, but I've made no progress in my life. I felt sort of spiritually bankrupt.
Mm.
And so I got up out of that classroom and I went and I made a phone call. I found a recovery program that I'm still part of today. And that really changed my life. I found that I found that Buddhism is wonderful, but I needed to be with people who know how to not drink,
Mm-hmm.
and I met a wide range of people in recovery that I never would have met otherwise. Actually, the first recovery meeting I went to, there was somebody from AA there, and we laughed a lot about that. So that was September 28th.
You laughed a lot about what?
We laughed that we were both showed up in this recovery meeting. And this person from Zen Center, we looked at each other and recognized each other. And we started laughing because of that.
You said somebody from Zen Center was there. I thought you said somebody from AA was there.
No, this was somebody from Zen Center was in this meeting, and we laughed out of recognition because that laughter of identification.
Yeah.
So I became a school teacher without, I never had to go to school drunk, or I used to the San Francisco school where your sister was involved, and I taught there for 35 years as a sober person. And I think both my Zen practice and my sobriety contributed to my being a kind of teacher I couldn't have been otherwise.
Yeah.
Because teaching is very, very demanding. And I continued to practice at Zen Center, but I felt that classroom, those third graders, I always loved third graders. I always taught third grade. That was my practice, was in the marketplace, was teaching those kids.
Mm.
And then, when I was Shuso at Green Gulch in 2000 with my teacher, Linda Cutts, once I had been Shuso, and that was a wonderful experience. I was on sabbatical that year that I was Shuso. The first thing I wanted to do was offer teachings to people in recovery, sharing Buddhist teachings that could support people in recovery. And so that was that's something I've really loved doing, not just through Zen Center, but through many other practice places in Northern California. Not just recovery meetings, but different practice centers. But it's always been informed by what I've learned in recovery,
Mm-hmm.
So that's it in a nutshell. And today those twin supports of both recovery and Buddhist practice have really enriched my life and carried me along, as if by a great wind through these many years.
I understand. Yeah. Yeah. I think I probably mentioned the last time we talked that and a lot of our friends here, maybe most our friends, we know through 12-step meetings.
Yeah.
I actually don't go to the meetings, but I've gone as a guest, and you know, if I was by myself and going to some town, I wanted to meet people, I'd go to an AA meeting.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to be with anybody who drinks. I mean, it's okay. And we let people drink here. If they come to our house, it's never a problem. My son Clay is here now with his mate and our 1.5-year-old grandchild. And you know, they'll get a beer. They'll get like one beer or 2 beers or something. But I remember when Kelly came, last time was maybe 5 years ago. Somebody gave us a bottle of wine, and we kept it for 3 months, waiting for him to come. And Katrinka tended bar while she was sober at the Pelican Inn. You know, she was manager there.
Oh, yeah.
And
oh, wow, yeah.
At the Panama Hotel in San Rafael. Anyway, I love recovery program, and we're involved with a private recovery program here too.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah.
I appreciate your story. Your story is really very interesting.
Well, let me read you the very first paragraph of my book.
Yeah.
Okay, this is from the introduction, and right underneath where it says introduction, I quote the Bodhisattva vow: I vow to live and be lived for the benefit of all beings. So these are the first words of my book. Buddhism did not cure my alcoholism. I turned to Zen to change my life, to align myself with the Sangha, and to find relief from the suffering of addiction. But until I opened my heart to the principles of recovery, I was cut off from the deepest source of my own being. Now I find that Zen Buddhist practice, lived in accord with the solace of recovery, can offer a life that is full of possibilities. It is understandable that those of us who are prone to addiction turn to drugs and alcohol and other distracting behaviors to medicate the distress within. I began drinking when I was a teenager, and alcohol promised to give me things I didn't have: self-confidence, an antidote to my social anxiety, and an ecstatic yes to a wide and wild life. Drugs and alcohol may be the closest thing to a spiritual experience that is. So can I read you from a chapter later on in the book?
Yeah,
Would this be a
do.
good time to do that?
Do.
Okay, so this, because I'd like to show how what I wanted to do in this book was to weave some of the principles of recovery in with Buddhist teachings that have inspired me and have helped me, and I hope, with the hope that they might help others as well. So this is from Chapter 5, Kintsugi, The Places We Are Broken. And it begins with a quote from Rumi: "The wound is where the light enters you." So this is a couple pages, David. The Zen tea master, Senno Rikyu, was traveling through southern Japan and was invited to dinner by a man who wanted to impress him with an elaborate antique jar. Rikyu, though, didn't seem to notice the jar, but spoke poetically about a branch swaying in the breeze outside. He said his goodbyes and went on his way. Frustrated, the host held up the jar and hurled it to the floor, where it broke into many jagged shards. The host turned to go to bed as his startled guests looked at one another. Gathering up the fragments, they joined them together using lacquer infused with gold, a technique that became known as kintsugi. When Rikyu returned on another visit and saw the repaired jar with the veins of gold highlighting the broken places, he exclaimed, "Now it is magnificent." One of my earliest impressions of Zen Buddhism was an article I saw in a magazine about the practice of kintsugi. The syllable kin means golden, and tsuji means joinery, to join with gold. When repairing a broken teacup, rather than disguising or hiding the broken places, they are highlighted, contributing to a new kind of beauty. The practice of kintsugi belongs to the Japanese ideal of wabi-sabi, the appreciation of objects that are simple and unpretentious, with a rustic, aged quality. Wabi-sabi recognizes the beauty of things that are incomplete, imperfect, well-worn, and venerable. The great Sufi poet Rumi said, "The wound is where the light enters you." All of us are slightly cracked. All of us have places in us that are broken, incomplete, wounded, imperfect. Sometimes we forget that the places in us that are broken are the very places where we can connect with other people. If we have suffered a terrible grief, we are uniquely qualified to reach out and help others who are grieving. If we have experienced a great loss, and we all have, we can comfort those who have lost. If we've been through a life-changing trauma, we can help those who are going through a dark and difficult time. If we have overcome addiction, we can help someone else who is struggling. When we turn around, face our own lives, and move toward healing, those places in us that are broken glow with a kind of golden thread. We don't sit zazen to try to improve ourselves, to perfect ourselves, to become a different or better version of ourselves. Rather, we sit to be exactly who we are. Though we don't sit with any idea of gain, we do come to know ourselves in an intimate way, all our flaws and cracks, and the places in us that are seamed with gold. Part of this knowing ourselves, part of healing the broken places, is waking up to the way we treat other people. Without being aware of it, we may be responding to others in a habitual way that pushes them away from us rather than allowing them to come closer. Many of us developed coping skills in childhood that protected us. Now we can begin to loosen these protective barriers as we get more comfortable in our own skin. I learned a Mexican proverb from my friend Chai when I was studying Spanish in Oaxaca. Each person has 4 parts: the part that everyone knows, the part that only that person knows, the part that everyone but that person knows, and the part that nobody knows. Working with others can give us a glimpse of the part of us that everyone is aware of, except us. Anyone can be peaceful and serene on a mountaintop, but it is in relationship with others that we can truly see ourselves. Sometimes others see special qualities in us that we are blind to, and sometimes they can help us see the places where we are broken, the places in which we push others away, returning to the painful isolation we've created when what we long for is intimacy. Addiction is a disease of isolation, and sometimes we sabotage relationships ensuring that isolation. We may be broken in ways that make it difficult to create wholesome relationships with others. In our families of origin, we may not have had the best role models for what a mature relationship can look like. We grew up thinking that whatever we witnessed at home was normal, having nothing else to compare it to. Conflict in our family of origin might have been so dangerous and threatening that we now avoid conflict at any cost. We may have inherited unskillful ways of relating to others and feel justified in that behavior because we feel we haven't been treated so well ourselves. If we want to move toward a way of relating that encourages peace, harmony, and reconciliation, it is important to look closely at and shift these habitual ways of being. How can we mend our brokenness? How can we be agents of peace in our own lives? And then this chapter goes on to share the work of John Gottman, who has studied relationships and some of the obvious ways in which we sabotage intimacy through unskillful means. So that's kintsugi.
That's great. That's great. it's giving me an idea of how to fix things here. Yeah.
Well, what Gottman says is what he's highlighted these 4 ways of relating that destroy intimacy rather than creating it, and they are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, or withdrawal. Now these are things that he studied in regards to marriage, but I think those are 4 ways, even in the workplace or with our adult children or even with our friends, that, by being defensive or critical or contemptuous of other people or just withdrawing when we're afraid of conflict, we can just create this kind of scorched earth around ourselves that no one can penetrate, And so I think if we want real intimacy with people, and addiction does cause isolation. It's a disease of loneliness, even when we're with other people. So I think looking closely at those things has been incredibly healing for me, myself.
Say the 4 things again.
Criticism. We all need to be able to state what we need in a relationship, but when we criticize another person in a kind of blanket way, Gottman says it's one thing to say to your partner, to criticize somebody in this kind of blanket way would be, you're always late, you never think of anyone but yourself.
Yeah, those are 2 words not to use, always and never.
Yeah. So instead of saying, you know what, I made a nice dinner and I really wish you could have called and told me you were going to be late, that invites a discussion or intimacy or even invites an apology. Whereas if we're saying something about someone that is really an exaggeration and isn't even true, it's much harder for them to hear us. But, Gottman says he can sit with a couple and tell within 15 minutes whether they're going to stay together. And a big one is if they show contempt for each other.
Ooh, ouch.
Deep sighs. Yeah, deep sighs, rolling your eyes, sniping at one another, demonstrating disgust on your face, those things. And then, defensiveness is if someone brings up something that's troubling them in your relationship and we just respond defensively to protect ourselves rather than trying to listen with an open heart and hear what their needs are and sharing our needs, we just get farther and farther apart. And stonewalling is a really interesting one because many people who do suffer from addiction grew up with addiction in their homes or with mental illness or with violence. And so maybe they saw their parents, when they were fighting, one would just give the other the silent treatment, or leave without saying where they were going. And they probably thought that behavior was preferable to acting out or being violent or, acting out in a way that could harm the other person. But that also doesn't invite intimacy and just triggers the other person into feeling rejected and abandoned. So I found his work very enlightening in terms of intimate relationships, both with love relationships, but also families and friends and in the workplace,
That makes a lot of sense there.
So I really, I had a lot of fun writing this book, and I have to say that I lead a meditation and recovery group in Oakland at a place called Lenox House, and a lot of these chapters are based on Dharma talks that I gave there, telling Buddhist story. The 8 worldly dharmas I find really helpful.
The what?
The 8 worldly dharmas.
And
what are
worldly
they? Winds. Pleasure, pain, loss and gain, fame and disgrace. These kind of polarities that we kind of bounce back and forth in between. That to me, that's a teaching that's been really helpful to me, is somebody in recovery because we tend to see things in black and white, you know.
You just named 6.
Oh, well, let me turn to that chapter and I'll share a little bit more about that. This is one of my favorite teachings. But praise and blame, pleasure, pain, loss and gain, fame and disgrace, pleasure and pain, praise and blame. But, you know, there are a lot of other ones like love and hate or hope and fear. So when we think of the Four Noble Truths and the teaching that life is suffering, I think one of the ways we create our own suffering is by ping-ponging back and forth between these 8 worldly dharmas where we're thinking we're seeking pleasure and we're avoiding pain, you know, or we're avoiding loss and trying to gather up things. It's sort of like that teaching of aversion and clinging, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think praise and blame is a very key one for me because, you know, as a teacher of children, I loved it when I was praised as a teacher, or when people heaped, you know, goodwill on me and told me what a great teacher I was and how much their child loved me. But one person say something negative to me or blame me for something, and I'd be cast into hell, you know, and be having conversations with that disgruntled parent in my mind. Yeah. And I went to Linda Cutts at one point when a kind of mentally ill parent had taken up a hatred for me and wrote this letter to the board of directors of the school of what a terrible person I was. All these things I had supposedly done to her daughter. You know, if anybody did those things to my daughter, I would have gone to the police. But luckily, I'd been teaching there for a long time. Nobody believed that stuff. It really gave me compassion for newer teachers who might be blamed for something without having a track record, you know. Mm. But I went to Linda to talk about this, of how this unfortunate woman, had taken up space in my mind. And she said, Linda said to me, if you ever want to know what ego is, watch what happens when you're unjustly accused. Isn't that great? Yeah. And so we talked a lot about that. I knew what kind of teacher I was. And then she said, we talked about the story, Is That So? You know, that Hakuin Jizenji's story, Is That So? Where he's blamed for getting a village girl pregnant and taking on her baby without complaint, and then saying, you know, is that so? You're the terrible monk, you gave birth, you got our daughter pregnant. Oh, is that so? You know, and so Linda said to me,
wait, you got to finish the story.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Hakuin Zenji was living by a river, and these grandparents came with a little baby and said, you got our daughter pregnant, you're a terrible monk. And Hakuin said, is that so? And he took that baby and raised it and fed it and took care of it. And a year later, the grandparents came back and said, you know, we're terribly sorry, but our daughter has told us that the father was really a young fisherman in the village. And you're such a wonderful monk for taking on this child without complaint. We're so sorry. And Hakuin said, is that so? And so in this conversation with my teacher, I found this story had come to my mind in terms of this woman who was blaming me for mistreating her daughter, which I certainly had not done. And Linda said to me, you know, if people are praising you and telling you what a wonderful teacher you are, can you let that roll off your back like water off a duck's back? And can you also do that when people blame you? Can you say, is that so? You know, I think of Suzuki Roshi saying, I know who I am, to Mel Weitzman. That's a story in your book, one of your books, you know. I know who I am. And I had to step back and think, well, I'm not the greatest teacher in the world. I'm not the worst teacher in the world, but I'm trying to live the Bodhisattva vow, teaching children in the best way that I can. So that woman ended up leaving the school, which was good for me.
Yeah, good for the school, sounds like.
But, David, I say in this book that when I came to Zen Center and I'd hear these stories about, from the Blue Cliff records, I'd just scratch my head and wonder what they meant. And then later in my life, some of these stories would come to mind and be there to help me. I suddenly knew what that meant. Is that so? I knew what that story meant for me, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of praise and blame in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's a hard one. People really like to be praised, and they really don't like to be blamed. And we remember the blame, like you said. We forget the praise after a while, but we remember the blame. And that's true of criticizing people. Or Shakespeare's got that line. I think it's in Julius Caesar that the good men do be forgotten, but anything they do that's not good will live after them long. And I don't remember exactly how it's stated.
The good is oft interred with their bones, while the evil that they do lives after them. Yeah.
There you go. Very good. Thank you.
Now here's a great line from King Lear. Like flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. I'm studying Shakespeare right now, so you hit me at a good time, David.
Ha! That's great. That's great. Wow. Well, so it comes out on the 18th. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll go on and I'm about 3 months ahead on podcast talks, but I think I'll just put yours up this weekend. And
well, thank you. And you know what? I don't think I said the name.
Oh, hey, that's very important. You should always do that.
Book. And the last time, you told me that you told me that last time, and I did it.
I will. I should have asked you.
Yeah, that's funny. That cracks me up.
All right, so please.
Okay, my book is called The Zen Way of Recovery, An Illuminated Path Out of the Darkness of Addiction. Now, this is the title that Shambhala gave it. I wanted to call it Finding Our Way, Zen Awakening in Recovery. But I've written 5 books for Shambhala now, and they've renamed all of them, so they seem to know what... when I talked to you before about my book, Buddhist Stories for Kids, I told you I wanted to call that book Monkeys in the Bodhi Tree.
Yeah.
But they said, well, that's a great title, but if we call it Buddhist Stories for Kids, when a parent Googles Buddhist Stories for Kids, your book will pop up, and that's true.
Yeah.
So I defer to Shambhala because they seem to know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I'm a little sheepish about this title. I think it's a little bit...
That's fine.
A little bit much, but
oh no, I think it's fine.
It's got a beautiful cover, David. It's a beautiful cover of a lotus in muddy water.
Yeah.
So that I'm very happy with that.
But I've been fortunate. I've named, Crooked Cucumber, Thank You and Okay, and then To Shine One Corner of the World, Moments with Shunryu Suzuki, right? That was put out by Random House under, and that went out of print. And then so Shambhala picked it up, and they said, no, we want to change the name. And they said, if I don't give them a name, they'll do it. So I figured out what they'd want to hear. Zen is right here, right?
That's a great title. And I love that book, David. And but that I love that phrase, to shine one corner of the world. And when I retired from the San Francisco school, that's how I started my retirement talk. That I started out by saying that the founder of the Zen Center that I've been a part of for many years, Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, suggested that rather than taking on the whole world, we shine one corner of the world, and my corner of the world has been my third grade classroom.
There you go.
And then I shared funny stories about my third graders, because they were always making me laugh.
Oh, that's great. Third grade, yeah.
This is a favorite. I'll tell you a favorite story. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I told you this last time.
No, I want to hear it.
Blanche Hartman. Okay, Blanche Hartman. She loved this story, and she borrowed this story and used it in some of her Dharma talks. Well, I was in my classroom, and it was silent, sustained reading time, and Nathan walked by my desk, and he did this little dance. And I called him over, and I said, "Nathan, what were you thinking about right then?" And he said, "Laura, do you ever forget you're alive and all of a sudden you remember again?"
Oh, that is so cool.
I said, "Yes, that's happened to me too." So I was honored to be part of his Kensho experience there.
Yeah.
Yeah, my third graders were my illuminated beings.
Yeah. Third grade's an interesting grade. They start growing up a little in the third grade, wouldn't you say?
They really do. Yes, that's what I love. They step into the sunlight of who they really are.
Yeah.
And they're very interesting beings. How old are you? You have grandkids, right? How old are they?
Well, Isla, who's here with us, is 1.5, and we're really enjoying her. She's so great. And then
Isla, that's a great name.
That's it's the Turkish for the ring of light around a moon. You see sometimes, and that there was.
Wow.
There was.
How do you spell that?
Aiyla. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And there was such a phenomena the night before she was born. And then that's Clay.
Wow.
And his prior daughter is Lucia. She just turned 5. And then Katrinka has 2, Katrinka and I through her have 2 granddaughters that are like 13 and 3 through her son. Yeah. Well, girls are.
Well, I hope you'll read. I hope you'll read them Buddhist Stories for Kids.
Oh, they've got it. They've both got it. They've all got it. And Elin, Elin, my prior wife. She loved it, and she's using it in school.
Great!
She teaches K1 too. I don't know exactly what she's done, but forever she's been doing that. She really, really liked it. Tell me another. Do you remember any other kids' stories?
Well, I might have told you this one last time. This is one of my very favorites. I was walking down the hallway, and 2 of my girls were walking behind me, and I don't know why they were talking about death, but but Talia said to Tess, "Hey, Tess, would you rather be buried or cremated?" And Tess said, "I don't know. Surprise me."
Well, that's Bob Hope's line.
But I'm sure a third grader would never have heard of Bob Hope. I think she came up with that on her own. There's no way she would have known about that. I didn't know that was a line.
Yeah, that's what Bob he said Hope to his wife.
When she asked him that same question? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, even if Tess heard that and used it appropriately, I still admire it.
That's pretty good. Remember any others?
Let's see.
You ought to collect them.
Well, I was able to kind of I put some of those stories in my Zen for Kids, my second book. One day in class, we were going around in the circle, and I asked the kids, "What superpower would you like to have?" So one kid said, "I'd like to be invisible." Someone else said, "I'd like to be a shapeshifter." And then Elena said, all bright eyes, she said, "I'd like to have the superpower of being able to understand other people's feelings."
Wow.
And I thought that was really
Good
terrific.
Lord.
And I called that in my book about Zen for Kids, I called that a moment of
No
Zen.
kidding. Yeah.
And another one is I used in the classroom that old cliche, great minds think alike.
Yeah.
And when I said that, Paul he had a look of consternation on his face, and he says, I say, great minds think alike. And Paul goes, "No, they don't. That's what makes them great."
Oh, that's really good.
Which I thought was brilliant.
Yes.
And Paul, that same kid said, somebody asked about DNA. And I said, can any of you tell us what DNA is? And Paul said, well, it's kind of like the recipe for yourself that's in your cells.
Very good.
Incredible,
yeah.
Right? And I took Paul out to lunch when he was in high school. And he had been in the Crucible in high school, and he played the bad guy. I think it's called Proctor in the Crucible, the bad guy. And I said, what was that like to play this villain? And he said, I think theater, playing a different role, it's all about empathy. He said, I had to have empathy for that villain in order to play him. I had to find his humanity. So, from the time he was in third grade on up through high school, that was a very sensitive and insightful boy.
Yeah, that's really good.
And I had a lot of kids like that I just adored. I had a boy in my first year of teaching, Terrell Tobias, and he was such a handful. And it was because his parents were both addicted and on the street.
Ooh.
And I finally sat him down and I said, I've got to figure out a way to be a better teacher for you. This isn't working out. He looked really startled and I said, what can I do to be a better teacher for you? And he said, I don't like sitting next to Ricky. And I said, okay, Terrell, I'll change your seat, but I need you. You're a leader, and I need you to lead the class in a better direction. And so we kind of shook hands on it. And the next day, this was my first year of teaching. The next day, it was getting close to 3:00, and I was at my wit's end, and the kids were throwing spitballs at each other. And Terrell jumped up on his desk, and he looked around, and he said, "Let the woman speak." And the whole class just kind of quieted down, and I gave Terrell a thumbs up. And a couple of years ago, Terrell looked me up, found me, and invited me to his wedding. And that just meant the world to me, to have him remember me all those years and invite me to his wedding. And wow, that was such a great thing. And that just confirmed for me that I picked the right thing to do for a living.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
So I miss kids, but I've been reading my stories in schools and libraries, and that's such a nice way for me to be with children without having to ask much of them, just to be there and read my stories to them. So I'll keep doing that.
Yeah. Well, you've got a good couple of callings that you have blended together very nicely. That's good. That's good. And like I said, I really appreciate both of them. With when I quit drinking, I actually didn't decide. I just stopped drinking, and then I thought, I started saying I quit drinking at 30 minutes till midnight on New Year's Eve. What I mean is that was my last drink. And the next day, somebody said, "Oh yeah, we were at a party, New Year's Day party in around Muir Beach, maybe, and there was wine there and everything. Normally, I would have thought, oh great, wine, and somebody said, hey, you want a glass of wine? And I said, nah, it just gets me into trouble. And I haven't had a drink since last year, and
well, that's great. That's great. How has that changed your life?
When I said I haven't had a drink since last year, it was 30 minutes. I mean, it was half a day since last year. It was January 1st.
Oh, I see what you mean. That's what you said to that person.
And I thought that was funny. So I wore that joke out. I kept saying it, and then I started looking forward to saying I haven't had a drink since the year before last. Like I said, there's a lot of people. If there was a Rand Corporation study that showed that people who had quit drinking, and they have very bad problem, who decided to start drinking socially again, they had no higher a recidivism rate than those who hadn't decided and just started drinking again. But I thought, I don't want to find which side I'm on to that. I don't want another drink. I don't even.
Well, that's very interesting to me because very often I've been in a recovery meeting where somebody decided they could drink again, and they went out and they started right up where they left off, even though they hadn't had a drink in 15 years.
Well,
and the wreckage was incredible. And I was so grateful that they came back and said, you know what? I forgot what it was like. I forgot what it was like, and I found out real quick what it was like, and came back to tell us.
Well, I heard a talk. I've been to a lot of meetings. I heard a lot of talk, and there was this one guy. He said, the difference between an alcoholic and a person who's not an alcoholic is not how much they drink. There's some people are very heavy drinkers, aren't alcoholics. And he said an alcoholic always wants alcohol. And if they quit drinking for 20 years and they start drinking again, they will take up right where they were in the progressive disease of alcoholism. But
I've seen that happen.
And I've seen people relapse. Most of the people I know don't relapse. We've got friends. I'm 19 years. Katrina's 25 years. We got friends that are 30, 35, 40 years, and 1 year and 1 week. It's very, I like being around it, I'll say.
Well, in my education about alcohol, I found out that some of the red flags that were certainly there for me at a very young age were craving. Once I started drinking, I wanted more. Personality change. I would go from being a very shy, quiet person. Actually, I loved that alcohol helped me talk to people and dance and all that. Blackouts, where you not passing out, but you wake up the next day and don't remember what you did the night before because your brain was so screwed up that you weren't laying down short-term memories. You were conscious when you were doing those things, but you weren't laying down the neurological pathways of short-term memory.
Yeah.
So, for people to keep drinking despite negative consequences, that's a pretty big red flag too. And I imagine you had some negative consequences that led to you not wanting to drink anymore.
Uh-huh.
Wouldn't you say?
Nothing terrible. I always sort of, it hadn't interfered with my work or anything, but I noticed when I quit that all my friends were very happy, and then I'd start remembering, and including people who drank. Then I can remember back, and I'd be too loud, and I did a lot of thoughtless things, nothing awful, terrible. Well,
Did you drive under the
yeah,
influence? Did you ever do that?
yeah.
Yeah. See, that's
No,
not good.
that's awful
Not good.
terrible, but
Yeah.
oh yeah, indeed. I got a drunk driving ticket the day before I quit. That's why I said.
Oh,
But I
okay.
enjoyed it. I
Yeah.
enjoyed getting the ticket. I enjoyed going to jail. I always enjoyed hangovers.
Wait, you went to jail?
Yeah, if you get arrested for drunk driving, you go to jail. And
Okay.
then Elin bailed me out. Ken Sawyer gave her some money. And when I walked out, Clay went, "Cool, Dad."
Oh my God. Quite the role model, right?
He doesn't. Neither of my sons have shown any great desire for alcohol. And although Kelly was, he was very high up in alcohol distribution, especially wine. He was in the wine business for 10 years. But he quit it to be a tree, to work on trees, and took,
wonderful.
Which was, took a 2/3 cut in pay, and was happy to do that, and has ended up being extremely successful with it and having 25 employees.
That's great.
Yeah,
great.
So that worked out well, and he loves it. Anyway, yeah.
Well, David, I really appreciate your interest in my work, in my books, and in my life. This has really been wonderful to talk with you. And you know what? I don't do PayPal or anything like that, but I'd love to send a contribution to cute.com. Why don't you just give me your address and I'll send you a check?
Oh, sure. Look, all someone ever has to do to make a contribution to Cuke Archives is to go to Cuke.com and hit the donate button. And the donate buttons are all over. It's on the top of the homepage and the bottom of the homepage.
Gee, how did I overlook that? Because I look at that all the time. So that's great. But I can do it with a check or something.
Yeah.
That way. Okay. Well, that's wonderful. It's such a great thing, and I'm on Instagram now at the behest of Shambhala, and so I see your Cuke archives postings on Instagram, which are a great way to start the day. What time is it where you are, David?
It's right now. It is 11 a.m. and you're at 8 p.m.
It's at 8 o'clock. Yeah, this is a good time for us to talk.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and I have some other books coming.
No
out,
kidding.
So.
Oh, tell me about it.
Well, see, then Shambhala invited me because they liked my work, my kids' books so much, to write 3 more books, wisdom stories from Tibet, from India, and from Japan. And so for the Tibetan stories, I worked with a wonderful Lama from Tibet, Lama Chonam. We did the whole thing on Zoom. He would tell me Tibetan stories, and then I would take notes and then shape them into a story with dialogue and description and so on. And now I'm just finishing up the Indian wisdom stories with a woman named Prachi Mararka who lives in Boulder. And we wanted to have wisdom stories from lots of different religious traditions in India, not just obviously Hindu, Muslim, and Buddhist, but also Jain and Sikh, and some of those lesser known strains that are there in India. So she tells me stories, and I write them up. And then when we finish that, I'll go on to Japanese stories, wisdom stories. So it's been a wonderful affiliation for me with Shambhala. They treat me very well, and they seem to like what I do. So it's been a very serendipitous relationship for me.
Yeah, no kidding.
And you work with them too, right?
Yeah.
You work with Shambhala, yeah.
When you mention the Japanese stories, I think of Chinese stories and Korean stories, and those three cultures are very closely aligned. And I'd be interested to know if there are Japanese stories that actually are Chinese stories. There's a lot of Japanese culture comes from China, but they've got plenty of their own too. So I don't know. I don't know about that. How much.
Well, some of the Indian stories go across disciplines too. So, you'll find a version of the blind man and the elephant. There's a Muslim version. There's a Persian version. There's a Sikh version. There's different versions of that same story. But the first one was in a Buddhist sutra, the story of the blind man and the elephant.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting wondering where these things come from. And, fairy tales, there are something like 1,000 versions of the Cinderella story in different cultures. So I think sometimes they're part of the collective unconscious.
Yeah. And the Messiah, there's a lot of Messiah stories. There's a lot of Messiahs born from virgins. That was a tradition too.
Or out of the side of an elephant.
Or out of his mother's armpit. That's another one. And a Catholic.
Yeah, God forbid they should come from the real place babies come from.
Well, a Catholic priest that I'm close with, who's more in the contemplative tradition, he said virgin just meant pure of heart.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That makes a lot more sense, actually.
Everything's like that. You can go back and find some sensible or mystical reason behind everything. Literalism is just a curse on religion.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for what you're doing. That's all great. It's very stimulating. It makes me think. And, I appreciate what you've done, what you're doing, and very impressive. So.
Well, thank you, David. And I think what you do is so wonderful, and I love your book titles. Oh, thank you, and okay, that's one of the great ones for sure. Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and it's always a lot of fun to talk to you, David.
Talking with you.
Thanks for putting up with me and for putting this up on Cube.com.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and we can do it again when you come out with your next one.
Okay. I would love
you have
that.
good things to say. You have a good voice, and I enjoyed talking to you.
Okay. Thanks so much, David.
Take care. Bye-bye. So thank you very much, Laura Burges. Burges with one S, which has plagued her. That was in A Brief History of Tassajara. She was quoted some. That was a mistake in the first printing. 2 S's on Burges. Oh, sorry, but we fixed it. And other than that, I think her name is flawlessly preserved. So thanks a lot, Laura, and we look forward to your future books. Good Lord. I feel embarrassed and ashamed comparing her books are just coming out like chicken lays eggs. So very good, and we look forward to your your book on recovery. Now let's repeat that name. The Zen Way of Recovery, an Illuminated Path Out of the Darkness of Addiction. Yeah, and excuse me for not saying right away, well, what's the name of your book? I usually do that. And if you're a writer, say, in her case, The Zen Way of Recovery. You don't have to do the subtitle every time. The Zen Way of Recovery, an Illuminated Path Out of the Darkness of Addiction. This has been a Cuke Audio Podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sonora with Dogette Bandita. Guest Dogette Boombita. Dear lovely Katrinka and dear lovely April, my son Clay's mate and him, and pre-toddler Isla. She's not really a baby anymore, and so we figured she wasn't really a baby anymore. She's 1.5, and she's not really a toddler she's not really a toddler anymore. I mean, she's not a toddler yet. So, well, I decided to use the term pre-toddler. So, listen, we're all wishing you and yours. And anyway, they're here for 6.5 weeks, and so far it's been great. I had to brush up on the word for chaos in Indonesian. And, well, there's various things. You can just say chaos, but that's with more educated people. I think it was kekacauan, something like that. Anyway, we're all wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.